My name is Monica Gleberman, and you're listening to Silence on Set podcast. On today's podcast, we have Ivan Shaw, who's in the new show, Dear Edward. The show is about Edward Adler, a boy who survives a plane crash that kills every other passenger, including his family members. As Edward and others try to make sense of life after the crash, unexpected friendships, romances, and communities are formed. So to talk about what fans can expect from this upcoming show, here's Ivan Shaw. What got you initially interested into acting? Did you have like a weird, crazy story that kind of led you in this path?
It was in college where I kind of stumbled across my first play. I was at UCLA and I just remember working really hard at this one thing for months and then putting it up on stage. Massive community come together and then feeling the reward of that night. I remember walking away from that experience going like, this feels like a family. And I love that. And I really loved the collective experience and how everybody just kind of came together to tell a story. And that was the first thing that really piqued my interest. And then shortly after that, I found myself on set. And then I got to witness kind of the machinery behind the whole thing. And I got to see how these things were set up and how the actors knew what to say and where to move and everything. But every time it would make it look like a whole new thing. And then cameras would follow them. And I just saw how the sausage was made. And it felt like, not to mix metaphors, but it just felt like one giant magic trick at the end of the day. And I was fascinated by it. It just seemed like a really thrilling, interesting life. And, it's such a departure from the way I grew up. I was actually a math major at UCLA, and it just seemed like such a different world from the one that I was accustomed to. And I just I figured, I might as well give it a shot. It seems like a very interesting life at the end of the day.
Well, you definitely give it a shot because I was doing research. So my deep dive was I saw that you did a couple of projects yourself, like, some shorts and things like that. And then you were in Rush Hour 2, which was huge at the time.
Barely, though. I wasn't really. I mean, I was like one of those gangsters that doesn't say anything. It was just not. I think I was in college at the time, but I just remember I didn't come from a back where I knew a lot of people in the industry. I didn't have family, entertainment industry family or anything like that. I didn't know how to do any of this. So when I first started, I just did everything. I just tried to do everything. Every play reading that popped up on Backstage West, every little casting call for this, I got myself into a class and I found out there was another actor who knew of auditions. So I started crashing auditions. And then this random thing for Rush Hour came by, and I don't even remember how I came across it or how I ended up there, but I remember meeting Brett Ratner, and it was just kind of a weird thing. Next thing you know, I'm kind of in. I'm not really in it. It was just one of those things where I was just throwing as many wet paper towels up against the wall to see what would stick.
It did say, I think, like Triad Gangster or something, but I did watch it, and like you're there, you're in it. So
Oh god.
that's like exciting. Like, when you're starting out and this is what you want to do. And they were major stars. And I mean, that was like the movie, like at the time, I mean, so many people were so excited for those films. So, I mean, it's a great way to kind of slowly enter. But then over time, you did more shorts, like different things, and then kind of headed over to television. So what made you decide to kind of switch mediums? Was it just, again, like, I'll take anything and everything? Or were there options where you can say, all right, I want to do this project like Pearson, or I want to do On the Verge?
That stuff came way later. I remember when I first started out during that time, the moment that I got an agent, the auditions started to become a lot more legitimate. And back then, in the early 2000s, there wasn't any work for us, for people who look like this. So you literally just did whatever you could get your hands on, and I was fortunate enough to fall into some really good projects at first, some really good, interesting filmmakers, interesting shows. I remember one of the very, very early ones was Mind of a Married Man on HBO by Mike Leitner. And I just remember I had one tiny little scene, and I just had such a lovely experience on that show. And yeah, I wasn't actively trying to choose one path or the other. I was just doing everything because that's what you did back then. You didn't have any agency to decide what you wanted to do. You just kind of went where the work was going.
You mentioned obviously your background, and this has come up in a couple of interviews. And a lot of people, like even currently, like, have credited Crazy Rich Asians and movies like Parasite and things that have brought in diversity, right? Wakanda bringing diversity like into the field now. Again, we have a long way to go, but slowly but surely kind of coming in where people can see all different races, all different, just backgrounds, everything like that. Were any of those type of things an eye opener for you in terms of like when those movies came out and were super successful? Was that helpful to you at all as an actor, or were you just so busy kind of focused in what you were doing?
It's very interesting to see how it's progressed over the years. I've been doing this for over 2 decades now, and you're exactly right. On one hand, we have a long way to go. You are seeing at least, the supporting characters fill in here and there, and you are starting to see more stories told. I think we still have a very long way to go in that sense, but it is encouraging that the amount of work that is out there. I mean, people starting out today have no idea what it was like 2 decades ago, and I'm sure people like Michelle Yeoh would say, "Oh, you have no idea what it was like during my time as well." It's really interesting to see. Cautiously optimistic about the way things are going. I hope it continues on this path. I really hope that our presence is doing something good for society and opening a lot of eyes, and not the opposite, which is creating more division. So it's all very encouraging, and it's very fun to have a front row seat at all these things, because for a while there, diversity just kind of meant anybody else. And now it's starting to feel like they're starting to carve out identities and the difference between a Chinese or a Korean or a Japanese, and they're starting to identify them, starting to delineate these stories. And I think that's a very important distinction, especially in our culture, and it's educating people at the same time.
Yeah, what I've loved with that is the fact that a lot of these films are not, there was like a shift for me, at least as a viewer, that they were not preachy. Like in the past, if you had, a token female, like a token, whatever person on, it was very preachy and like, and it just felt like they were kind of speaking for you and kind of trying to teach the audience. Whereas now I feel like, and
Hmm.
I don't know if you agree with this, but I feel like there's been a little shift where instead of teaching, it exists. These characters, if they say something from their culture, if they say something from their background and you don't know what it is and you're a viewer, I feel like it pushes you to be educated, to look it up and do research and be a little more involved in it. And I feel like that
Yes.
shift is extremely important in terms of for actors, like with roles, and in terms of the viewers.
Yeah, and you're exactly perfectly articulate about that. Is the idea that it can just exist rather than being a stereotypical thing. For a long time, I remember in my 20s at one point saying to my agent, like, I'm not going to get the Chinese food delivery back parts. And they're just mostly the Chinese food funny guy or the gangster or something like that. And I don't fit in either of those categories really, because there are a million guys that'll probably make the Chinese food guy funnier, and there are other tougher guys that way more intimidating than I. And now you do get to be a part of shows where it's reflective of society, where you're just embedded into these casts, and it's nice that way. And you're exactly right. If they do present something about the culture, hopefully that just piques somebody's interest and they can dive further into it on their own rather than being didactic about it and whatnot.
Yeah, and you've done such a great job with a lot of the roles that you picked. I mean, one of the big ones, obviously, we should lead into is the cleaning lady. I mean,
Uh,
that's such a great role. Not only are you
yeah.
hilarious, not only do I love Marco, but there's so many aspects to him. I just love everything about him. So I wanted to know, when you got that script, how do you form Marco? What were your kind of movements to move forward once you got hired and create him?
I loved playing Marco so much. He was definitely a darker and troubled character. My take on Marco is that he was always the guy that was one step away from greatness all the time. He's that hustler that he's got the answer. He's almost there all the time. In the same sense, he's got to be like the king of his jungle wherever he goes. He might make the salary of, some very low salary compared to really wealthy people, but he'll walk into a room like he's big dog, even though he's not. He's got that kind of pride and ego and it's very territorial. It comes from deeply rooted traumas that he's experienced in his own family, and he can't ever outrun them because he's not the type of guy to go to therapy and do the work or whatever. So all he does is repeat these patterns and perpetually get himself into more and more trouble as the story goes on. But at the end of the day, he qualifies all of his actions by his anthem, which is, I just love my family. I'll do anything for my family. We're a family. But that very quickly bleeds into issues of control and dominance, and how dare somebody else provide for my family. That's my job, even though at times you can't. It's a very interesting psychology to play. And I had a really great time playing that character.
I loved him because I felt, although there might have been times where he wasn't making the best decisions, as humans, we all don't make the best decisions. So there were a lot of times
Hmm.
where I kind of related to some of the things. I mean, not to the extreme, but some of the things that he was doing, that I related to because we all mess up and we all make mistakes. And he just never gave up. That was the one thing that I loved. Like he would just keep coming back no matter what.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. And I think, it was so quick from the time that they were writing the episodes to the time that we were shooting that first season. And I could feel the showrunner and the writers kind of like start to give me a little bit of leaf. Like we're gonna get him some trouble, but we're gonna get him out. So like have fun with the trouble a little bit and then we'll figure out a way out. We'll get him out of it. You know what I mean? It was fun. It was a good time.
What is the one thing, obviously now that, kind of in the past, but what is one thing about Marco that you miss playing and one thing that you're kind of relieved you don't have to do anymore?
I think the thing that I missed most about playing Marco was his messiness. I really liked his clunky way of moving through life, but also passionately justifying every step along the way. There's something really intrinsically messy about that process that I really like.
But to go from that, let's step up. Chicago Med, you go from that to
Okay.
Dr. Justin. What was that like for you? Because when I watch these shows, you guys make it so effortless, like when you're watching it. But the wording, all the technical stuff, the movement, the grabbing the feel, like everything has to look seamless. It has to look right. Like you do this for a living. This is your job every single day.
Hmm.
Obviously, that's your job as an actor. How do you handle all of those aspects?
Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate that because Chicago Med is no joke. That is not an easy task because there's a whole machinery behind what you're seeing on screen, and there's a whole medical world that you have to dive into. So when you're not shooting, you're sitting there practicing suture, just so that when you have to do it on the day, it doesn't look like it's your first time doing it. And you have to get accustomed to all these things. And every episode there'll be a breakdown on how to say certain things. When it comes to the technical aspects of it, a lot of it just comes down to repetition. You just have to say hepatic encephalitis a lot of times before you actually go on camera. But once you figure out, how to pronounce these certain things, you end up getting by. But I remember a lot of it came down to feeling like a little bit of a dance rehearsal. There was this one scene where Jesse Schramm and I had to deliver a baby in the woods. And the entire process from the time you get to the patient to delivering the baby, it has to work in step with the dialogue, with the blocking, with the camera. And it became, so we rehearsed it like a dance with very specific moves and props. And you have to know exactly what the props are. You have to know exactly how the props behave. We spend a few hours the day before doing it, and then you get to set, and then you do it on the day. And then hopefully the idea is you remember your lines, the blocking, and how to do, and where the goo goes for the thing, and then the bun, and then blanket, and then and then how to fold the blanket when you put it away. And it's just, and hopefully, and they do a very good job cutting it all together. The best note that I got was it has to look like calm chaos. Your role as a doctor, you have to bring a lot of calm to it, but the things that you're doing in the movements are sometimes like very urgent, which is an interesting kind of dichotomy to play.
Yeah, I was on set when they first introduced Chicago Med. They had us on
Oh
like a
wow.
couple times since then, but they were serious. I mean, like you said, it was no joke. So when we came on, they actually did a demonstration where they had like a person that was like a body, like the middle section was fake, and they had us like pick them apart and use different instruments, and like the
Yeah.
actors were there, and like we were all just kind of like joking because it was like, what's this? And they have all these specialists and people that are on there because they want it to be
Hmm.
as real as possible.
Yeah.
So it was
Yep.
crazy to watch that. And I was like, how do these actors do this? Because I could not do this. Like he would say a word and I went, okay, great. No, I got it. And I would do it. And I'm like, wait, what was that word again? Say that again.
It gets so confusing very quickly. I mean, you're exactly right. I have a lot of respect for those people that do it 22 episodes every year because that is no joke. I remember my first day I was working with Nick Gelfus and Dom Raines, and we had this scene that was very confusing, and it was a walk and talk. And my first day, we had to go in the trailer and just like, do we completely understand who gets what and what this scene is actually saying and what all the moving pieces are and everything? And we had had to sit there and like really dive into the script and really think about exactly what we were saying and why we were saying and where. And it's just amazing to me that these guys are in season 8, and we're sitting here going, yeah, this is you still have to just dive into it and really just figure it out beat by beat, line by line. You know, they do a very good job. Every time I talk to a medical professional that does watch the show, they do say that that show specifically does a very good job when it comes to the medicine aspect of it.
Was it harder for you to play someone like Marco who has emotional baggage and a lot of emotional moments, you know, taking care of his family and just trying to do all of these things? Or was it more difficult for you to play someone like a doctor given the circumstances? Because they're so different, but they're so hard, I think, on both ends.
I think at the end of the day, it was probably more challenging to play the doctor because I like to work from a place where I understand the character's wounds in life and their scars. And I really like to work from that place because that'll fuel everything. And it doesn't mean that they're, you know, dark and miserable the entire time, but it just informs all of their behavior outside of that. And I found the character in Chicago Med, especially my conversations with the creators, is they didn't want me to have this guy come from a dark place. He was actually a kind of like a bright light of optimism in the entire world. He was, you know, he was doing it just for the sake of wanting to do it and wanting to help others. And I find the thing that I enjoy sinking my teeth into are characters like Marco, where it comes from a very specific history and wounds, you know.
For these two characters, was there anything while you were playing them that just like offset that someone wouldn't know, that either that was funny that kind of helped you get through it, or something that would help you in terms of, you know, remembering these crazy medical terms, or like for Marco, remembering kind of where we are in his life at certain parts? Are there things like that that you kind of like, because these are like heavy moments, so I'm hoping like offset you guys are like joking or at least having some sort of light moments in between all of this kind of stuff?
Yeah, you would be surprised how many times we're talking over a fictitious person that's very ill, and it very quickly becomes something hilarious right after cut. There was this one scene where in Med, I remember where there was a climber who fell, and I went to go catch the rope, and it burned my hand. And in the scene after that, Dom Raines comes up to me and says, "Let me see your hands." And he goes, "That's a pretty severe rope burn." But he couldn't say rope burn, and every take he kept saying rug burn. So he was saying, and on even on in Shram was in the scene too, and on Shram's coverage, Dom would say, we get to that point, Doug would say, Dom would say rug burns, and we're like, yep, and then just get her coverage. And then the moment that the scene was done, everybody was just like, Dom, you're killing me with the rug burns.
I love those kind of stories because when they're doing, for people that don't know, when they're doing coverage, the camera's on you. They're reading
Yeah.
the same scene. So if he says something that's funny, you don't want to like laugh because the camera's on you and hold up everybody. But at the same part,
Yeah.
it's like, how do you not laugh at the same time?
Those guys are hilarious. Dom and Jesse were especially fun to work with because they were just goofballs. They're really funny.
From what I've seen so far, will we be seeing more of Dr. Justin, do you think, down the
I don't
line?
know. I mean, they left it open, so yeah, we'll see. TBD.
I was intrigued by this. I saw that you did 3 short films in a row. I think it was Milkshake Girls, The Last Ride, I'm doing them out of order, I think, and American. And I was
Uh
curious as
huh.
to why something like a short film, is there something that attracts that to you? Because you've done a lot of them throughout your career. Is there something that in particular that makes those special for you? Like, you know, some people like indie films, some people like movie, TV. Is there something about a short that you enjoy?
I personally love the format of short films. If you can tell a story, a well told story in short format like that, I think that's a very huge accomplishment. And I think it's a different magic trick, you know? So, just first and foremost, I really enjoy that format. And all those ones that you listed, they were always either a producer that I'd worked with before was producing this thing, either trying to get a new filmmaker's film off the ground or something like that. Or I think for Milkshake Girl, and the actress wanted to direct this thing. And they're all people I knew. So it was all a collaboration that I wanted to be a part of. Either the messaging of the short or the character in the short was really interesting. But there was always some sort of interesting aspect to it that made me really want to do it. They're usually a couple of days, and if I have a couple of days free, you know, it's just a really fun thing to do. One of my favorite projects I've ever done might be a short film called Mission Chinese. It's by these guys. They have this company called Sunday Paper. They created this world. It was for, I think it was meant to be the brand video for this company in New York called Freeman Sporting Club in the Lower East Side. I played this mute chef assassin. It was a long time ago. Have you seen it? If you
I've
haven't seen it,
seen
you can
it.
find.
No, I've
Oh
seen
yeah,
it.
you've seen it.
Yeah.
Isn't that brilliantly shot?
It's so good. The cinematography on
It's
that,
incredible.
I was extremely impressed because I love short films and I love indie films in particular because I do think that it requires creativity. And nothing against like, walking on like a Chicago Fire PD Med set, but when you walk on
Yeah.
that set, a lot of stuff is kind of relatively machinery, right? It's like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and you're kind of in and out. When you do shorts and indies, it's like no money, right? So it's like emergency.
Hmm.
How do we do this
Yeah.
problem? How do we get the shot? That short film was super impressive for the amount of money that they had to make with those
Hmm.
shots and then the storytelling.
Hmm.
Kind of like
Yeah.
blew my mind on that one.
I want to say we shot it over the course of one night in San
Really?
Francisco at Mission Chinese. It was so impressive to see what they did in the end. And yeah, those guys are great. I was hoping that they would turn that into a longer format thing just because I like that world so much and I like that character so much, you know?
Are you drawn to that kind of creativity where there's like an emergency and we need to fix it? Like, we can't shoot at like at this place, or we're moving all the shots because it's raining and like, and there's no money, so you're like jumping around and kind of juggling, or it's such a collaborative process. I've been on those kind of sets. It's so different. It's such a different environment. Someone once told me when I was on one of those sets, it doesn't matter where the best idea comes from, as long as it's
Hmm.
the best idea.
Yeah.
Everybody kind of works together and works towards that goal of achieving that best idea. So, there'd be like
Yeah.
little circles of everyone kind of talking to try to like make whatever problem, like solve whatever issue that was going on.
It is. It's kind of the mentality that I come from. And even on the big, massive professional sets, you try to take the same mentality because you do whatever you can to get it done, you know? If that means standing out in the rain until 3 in the morning, like we did for Cleaning Lady, shooting that one flashback scene in the Philippines, I was out till 5, 6 in the morning in freezing cold rain. And it's one of those things where it's just like shooting a short film, whatever. Hey, just do it. I'll go change in this living room over here. Let's do it again. And I think that's a very important philosophy to come from. You don't complain about it. You do it. You make it, you get it done.
You've kind of done a little of everything basically, right? So you've
Mm.
movies, big budget, low budget, short films, all different sorts of things, television, all of that. Are there certain things that you feel that you've learned from like your first project you ever did to where you are now that you kind of instill in your brain?
I think one big philosophy is just being game, whatever goes. And you would be surprised how invaluable that is when things really hit the fan and stuff falls apart. I have been part of some very, very difficult productions where at the end of the day, you have to exercise an incredible amount of patience and you're focused on one thing, which is getting the job done and having the story told. That's all you can do. But I would say that would be the biggest thing that I learned from way back in the day. It's that, and I remember when I was in college, I did a USC short film. I remember it was like my first meeting with an agent or something right before a day of rehearsal. And I had to go from the valley all the way to downtown or something. And I remember being so like gun shy in the agent meeting, and I was running over, and he kept talking, and I felt bad, but I really had to go. And I ended up being 30 or 40 minutes late to this rehearsal or something. And she sat everybody down, and I was the lead. She sat everybody down. She said, "Just keep in mind, everybody's replaceable," and it's very, very true. And I've seen it happen over and over again in the career, and that's also something I never forget. Everybody's replaceable.
It's like scary advice, right, to hear that, or a scary statement, but I guess in a way it also elevates you, right? Because if everyone's replaceable, you want to do your absolute best, to make sure that it's coming across and you're on time and you're doing all these things to get the project going.
You want to do your best. You want to work well with others. You don't want to let your ego get in the way. Your North Star has to be the story. I mean, it sounds like daunting advice, but I was just listening to the Hollywood Reporter Roundtable with Robert De Niro, and one big thing he said is he said he's seen a lot of people come and go, and when things are going really well, just take it easy, relax. Everybody's replaceable,
Mhm.
and that's true. When things are going really well, just chill the fuck out. It's tough, but yeah, it's a crazy industry, and so much of it is out of your control. So just try to do the work and be a good person along the way, I guess.
So let's get into Dear Edward. It's such a great show. You are so fantastic in it, but I think this is like
Amazing.
Emmy show. Like this is like next level, and it's done by Jason
Oh
Katims.
wow.
And I mean, first of all, the cast is ridiculous on the show. You have Connie Britton, who is reunited excited with Jason to do this show. You have Taylor Schilling. I mean, the list goes on, and there's just so many
Mhm.
fantastic people on the show. How did this come to your kind of attention, and why were you drawn to Steve in particular?
Okay, so the first part of the question, the short answer is I auditioned my face off. It was a long process and it was incredibly competitive. Obviously, everybody in town wanted this part. And I had a couple of, callbacks and work sessions with Jason, and Fisher Stevens was directing the pilot, the first episode, which I'm not in. He was also directing me in the work sessions and the Apple screen test. And it was an interesting kind of process in the audition process. I remember it going from my take on it being a little bit more sad and heavy than
Mhm.
what they wanted. And then Jason kind of pushed me more towards the levity of it and also having the emotions. So by the Apple screen test, it became a little bit more of everything rather than just grieving itself, I felt like. But they were incredible. And the casting director, Christian Charbonnier, is just phenomenal. And he was very good at like slipping me notes outside of the entire thing and giving me little hints here and there. And then by the time I actually had the Apple screen test, Brittany Hall had already been cast. We know reps in common, or my reps know her reps or something like that. So they put us on a Zoom and we chatted the day before and we got along right away. She was very much in my corner from the beginning, and I got to read with her for my Apple screen test, which was amazing. It was great. God, when it comes to the character Steve, I love this character because on the outside, by any metrics, he's successful. He's very straight laced, conservative. He's a financial wizard. He's a gazillionaire. He's got it all together, right? On the outside. But what I found fascinating about this character is that all of these things are in place in his life present day, not because that was his dream and desire and passion, because he wanted to be wealthy or any of these things, but more so because he was always living for something else. He was living for his parents. He had to take care of his parents because his brother was such a mess. And then Daphne came into his life and then he had to live for her. So he was always doing these things for other people. And it kind of created the psychological scaffolding that comes crumbling down in the show, and we learn that is very frail at the end of the day. And as the show goes on, what we learn is Steve's brother died in a plane crash, and that's how Steve is introduced in this world. And over the course of the show, he essentially he discovers things about his brother's life and has to confront and battle these very challenging dynamics that he's had and some decisions that he's made, and he has to come face to face with some challenging truths.
So, Dear Edward, if you haven't
Mhm.
heard about it, I mean, Apple's been advertising it. There's been tons of stuff like, first looks and pictures and stuff that have come out. But if you've never heard of it, it's coming out soon. Description is a 12-year-old boy becomes the lone survivor of a plane crash. As he and others affected by the tragedy try to make sense of what happened, unexpected friendship, romances, and communities are formed. So, there's a plane crash and one survivor. And so you can imagine the fallout from that,
Yeah,
right? Like, if there's 200 people on the plane, there's going to be people
yeah.
that were affected by whoever did not survive that crash.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. And that's how we all end up coming together. It's a great show. It's a really unique, special thing. I think Jason did a really great job there. He's a fascinating person to work with.
Definitely individual and a very original, beautiful show, because I think there are sometimes when something like this happens on a show where a massive tragedy happens to a group of characters and they intertwine them in a ridiculous way. Like you're like, there's no way. Like they wouldn't meet that way, or
Hmm.
this wouldn't happen. This show is a very realistic interpretation of what would happen, for a group of people. It's not every single person that was affected from the flight, but for a group of people that were
Hmm.
affected, it makes sense. I felt like it was
Yeah.
so organic. And then the way he films it, I felt like, especially for your character, there's a lot of what seemed like freedom in front of the camera where you were able to not necessarily have to say something to convey how, he's feeling. As we learn more information about his brother, there are things that
Hmm.
I feel like you act out that you don't necessarily, again, you're showing us, not necessarily telling us, if that makes sense on your end. And I think you did such a
Yeah.
great job of doing that, because when I'm watching you, the way that your facial expressions are, the way where, something might remind you of him, whatever the case is, you don't even have to say anything. And it's like we just look at you and the shots on you and it's quiet and you're just like, oh, like if that was me, me. Like, I just know what that must feel like. So was that kind of the feeling on set? I know obviously you have lines and things like that, but there seemed to be like a little bit of a freedom aspect to give you guys some space to kind of explore these characters.
Yes, and that's absolutely the short answer is yes. You're spot on about that, and I think freedom is exactly the way that I would describe working on that show. Really never experienced anything like this, where it's a dream scenario for the actor. You don't have blocking really. You don't. The camera moves around you. The camera will find you. There would be times when an actor would come directly in line at the camera and completely block you, and you're kind of conditioned to move around, lean a certain ways to find the camera. They don't want you to do this on the show at all. The camera will just start to circle around and start to find you. And it creates exactly what you're talking about, which is this freedom to just either sit in silence and just really take your time in moments, or to move however you want through a scene. I think that's the interesting thing about this story is that you learn the idea and the subject of grief isn't just what you read in books and isn't just the stages of grief, but it's also everything else. It's joy, it's laughter, it's messy, it's hopeful, it's all these very beautiful, necessary things that you got to go through. And I think directors and the filmmakers and Jason and the writers, and they just did such a great job of telling all sides of that story, whether it's a massive argument scene or in a silence, which are some of my favorites. So thank you for that, because that was some of those scenes where it's not easy. Sometimes it's easier just having a bunch of dialogue so that the audience knows exactly what's going on, and then other times you're just yourself in the camera and you have to tell a story. It's exciting but challenging.
I love Steve, and I agree with you because when you see him, the outside package looks perfect. And then as we just like everything else, right? As we start to get to know him, the outside package might not be perfect and it might be done that way for a reason. And then as you start learning those reasons, and then you have a loss that kind of breaks down and he goes on this kind of like journey, and you do such a great job with him. You're not in every single episode when the show first starts, but when we meet you, there's a force to be reckoned when you come on. I mean, it's hard to ignore. I mean, like right away when you came in, I was like, ooh, this is different. And it was a very commanding presence, a very emotional, and a lot of the moments like I was talking about where you're not talking or maybe the camera's on you, which could be super scary as an actor. I can only imagine where you're just like, I don't know what to do. Like, you're kind of just sitting there. All of those things you did so well that, I mean, it's just hard to ignore your performance, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And it's hard to ignore how amazing Steve is and how much of a benefit it was having him come in when he comes in and moving further.
Thank you. That's so incredibly generous and kind of you. That's very nice to hear. That's incredible feedback. Even if you're lying to me, keep lying, please. No, okay.
No, I'm telling the truth honestly. I swear, because I would have watched one or two and just been like, yeah, I'm good. But there's just
Yeah.
beautiful presence with you. Like when you come on, and I don't know what it is. I don't know if maybe it's part of Steve. I don't know. But when you come on, and I've watched a lot of your projects, listen, you're always good. But when you came in, this was, I think, a little different. And then maybe it was how it shot, maybe it was the cast, maybe there's just different elements to every single set. But there was
Mm.
something different about this one. He's so commanding. And the moments that you create on it, you can't knock him for anything that he's doing, I guess, is the easiest way I could say it, for some of the decisions he makes, because you just understand him. Like I just understand him and I just feel for him.
Thank you. That's so nice to hear. That's very kind of you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I will say, you come in and out of shows, you do a bunch of different types of TV shows and movies and stuff. And over the course of time, it's rare to find this kind of magical cohesion amongst everybody else. Because I will say, if anything, my performance is supported by those around me. Everybody was so amazing to work with, especially the people. And I won't say who I end up working with a lot later on, but I mean, you're in front of these amazing actors and actresses, and a lot of times you're just there observing, being a participant. You're not thinking about the acting part of it or the character part of it, because everything that's happening in front of you is so interesting and dynamic. We just had the premiere last night, and I got to see all these people that I adore, and you look around the room, and it is one of those projects where you go, wow, something special has been created here. Something really magical and interesting. And I think that starts from the top down. I think think Jason Katims is a profoundly good human being, and I think he has the ability to create this ecosystem that is actually beautiful, where everybody thrives and everybody succeeds and does really well. He's done it time and time again. I think this is no stranger to his brand. I think he's done a beautiful job of just creating this wonderful set and wonderful group of people. I'm telling you, everybody from the top down every time we were at work would just go, I love working here, which is not the case most of the time.
So you went to the premiere. Was that the first time
Yes.
you got to see any of it?
No, I've seen all 10.
Oh, okay. So you've seen all of them. Okay.
I've seen all of
Oh,
them.
so you're ahead of me. Yeah, I'm so jealous. Okay. But what was for you watching this one in particular and working with Jason? I'm already hoping for season 2. I haven't not finished, so I don't know where we are in episode 10, but I'm already like, let's go for season 2. So for you is if that follows the storyline. And so if there is a Steve in episode 10 and there was an opportunity to do a second season, is this something that you would explore like further and play him for longer periods of time?
1000%. Of course. Yeah. I mean, there was a bunch of chatter about it last night and a lot of speculation about what the future might behold. But I think after everybody has seen it come together in the way that it has and seen the response just from the first episode last night, between the critics to the fans to people who worked on it to the reps, I mean, everybody just kind of acknowledged that this thing's going to be a force. So I would personally be surprised if we didn't go second season. That's my very wishful thinking, but of course, I'm there. I'm totally there for second season.
Hope you guys enjoyed listening to Ivan Shaw talk about his career and, of course, his latest character of Steve in the new Apple TV Plus show, Dear Edward. The show will make its global debut with the first 3 episodes of its 10-episode first season on Friday, February 3rd, followed by one new episode weekly every Friday through March 24th. So make sure you head over to Apple TV to check it out. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you're updated on all of our latest podcasts, and head over to our YouTube channel, hit subscribe so you're updated on all of our video content.